So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of ELTAI, I welcome you for this webinar. So beyond welcoming, I also thought of appreciating you people for the commitment you have in spite of hard times outside. Uh, Hats off to your commitment for making it possible to attend this webinar. So before we move on to the session, I would like you to watch a Prom Clip on ELTAI. So thank you for watching the Prom Clip. A few announcements for audience. So in course of the session, I'll be posting a few information about the certificates and how to download it on the chat. So please read through the chat and do accordingly. And I request the participants not to share your personal numbers or emails and other stuff in the chat. Thank you. So now I request Dr. Sridhar to take over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam. I'm Dr. Sridhar Madhi, Assistant Professor of English from Anurag University. On behalf of English Language Teachers Association of India, ELTAI Hyderabad South Chapter, welcome you all. This afternoon, we have with us Dr. Deepaprasad L, and it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker of 50th webinar of ELTAI. Dr. Deepaprasad is a teacher by passion and an evergreen learner for life. Researcher and casual writer, she takes a keen interest in harmonizing ELT, language studies, and literature. Associated with writing textbooks for University of Kerala since 2015, employed with the University College Trivandrum as an assistant professor. He authored books, and where I would like to read the titles of her books, 3 books. The first one, Writing Today, Developing Skills in Academic and Workplace Writing. And the second one, An Easy Handbook on Linguistics. And the third one, Achieving Sustainable Management of Burial and Temperature Forests. So her credit goes to to these 3 books. And coming to today's presentation. The presentation will look at the adaptation of literary classics in different genres, focusing on painting and poems primarily about Icarus and Faust. It will look at expression of similar thoughts using different media, print and visual mediums. Does such expression merit comparison? Are they equally powerful? How do artists convey their thoughts and how do we perceive them? These are some of the moot questions the speaker will address using a large number of illustrations. It will also look at movie adaptations of classics in English, how the figure of an overachiever is portrayed across time. Now it's time to listen to Madam. Dr. Deepa, Madam, the platform is open for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madhi. Before I begin, let me take this opportunity to thank ELTAI and especially Dr. Mohan Raj and Dr. Lal for being facilitators of giving me this opportunity, this wonderful opportunity. And when I think that it is the 50th year of ELTAI and it is the 50th webinar, I really feel honored and lucky to be doing this. So huge thank you for the ELTAI team, the ELTAI family, for providing me this platform where I can share some of my thoughts about adapting classics, word classics or literary classics in different genres. Just 1 second. This was the last slide. I need to go to the first slide. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry, I should have done that in the beginning. Yeah, so today's topic is adaptations of literary classics across genres. So primarily about paintings and literature, how paintings have inspired literature and how literature has inspired various classics in painting. This is not something new. As we all know, it has been there for a long time, since ancient times. So I've chosen 3 photographs, 3 paintings. Like this is the famous Ophelia, the painting of Ophelia by Sir John Everett Millais. And this is the painting of Lady of Shalott. It's based on Tennyson's poem, Lady of Shalott. And this is by Salvador Dali. It's titled Natty Party. So I hope it's easy guess that it was based on Alice in Wonderland. We have done maybe 10 to 11 of these paintings based on the topics in Alice in Wonderland. So moving on to our presentation. There are generally considered to be 3 major forms of art. So there are differences of opinion, yes. There are more forms of art, yes. But primarily we talk about visual arts, literature arts, and performing arts. So my topic is about intergeneric, about how these things move between genres. So visual arts being adapted into performing arts, or maybe performing arts being adapted into literature arts. So the point is there's a slight confusion, like what do we talk about really? Are we talking about literature in art? Are we talking about literature as art? Are we talking about literature and art? Or are we broadly talking about literary art or about art in literature? So all these confusions aside, I thought we would discuss, we would share something about art meeting literature, a common point where art and literature meet and communicate. There is interchange, interplay of meaning, semiotics, and the sort of exchange of ideas that happen, that interaction that happens between genres of art. So, like I said, this is nothing new. It has been there. We know how Dante's Inferno has inspired a number of paintings, how our temples have had sculptors based on the epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, and how the churches in Europe have had paintings based on Bible. So this is nothing new actually, though we tend to talk about it based on the modern instances. That's all. So two examples that I'd like to show you. One is first is by Pablo Picasso. This is Don Quixote, which he drew in 1955. Superb example of his craft, and this with a few dashes, with a few lines, he actually captures the spirit of that book. That is what the adaptation does. The adaptation of Don Quixote, when it happened to a painting, by a master painter, the spirit of that work, the entire thing, that those words are all captured into a few strokes of lines, and that's just black and white. And the next one is by René Magritte. It's based on, actually, it took me a couple of seconds to realize that this is a painting and not a photograph. This is as perfect as a photograph. It's actually a painting by René Magritte, based on the short story Domain of Arnheim by Edgar Allan Poe. I don't have to tell you how beautifully it captures the nuances of the world of Poe, the world that Poe has created in his short stories. So moving on from painting, we have photographs that have tried to capture, that have tried to adapt the essence of literature. So the first one here, it shows Jeff Wall's painting. He says it took like 3,000 something bulbs to light up for this photograph to be taken. So this is based on Ralph Ellison's book, The Invisible Man. And this photograph is by Elida Tesla. It's based on the work Ulysses, the classic, the masterpiece, Ulysses by James Joyce, the novel. And it's titled Doubling. So this was actually 4,311 empty wine bottles with gerunds written on the paper and corks with verbs, both these gerunds and verbs taken from the novel Ulysses. And it also all of them have postcards, 4,311 postcards with different pictures of that river, which he talks about in the novel. Now, when we talk about adaptations across genres, we can't really talk about literature inspiring painting alone. It has happened the other way around also. So the best example would probably be The Girl with the Pearl Earring. This was actually by a Dutch artist, I think Vermeer, in 17th century. So that painting had inspired a novelist to come up with a novel. She adapted that painting into a novel. She gave a life to that painting, and she put that life in words. So that novel, Girl with a Pearl Earring, I think it came in 1999. So look at the time span that happened between the adaptation.
Ma'am,
Sorry?
I'm really sorry to stop you.
Yeah.
The problem is because of your earphone, which is that's sitting against you, we get a background noise, ma'am. So I think that is hindering the. This, I mean, your earphone. Can you hold that with you? Can you hold that? Or something? Because since it's shaking, when it hits on you, we get a weird sound.
Right. Okay, so I need to hold this.
Yeah, if possible.
Okay.
Sorry for sorry.
That's okay. I mean, clarity is what matters. So.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for
Okay.
understanding.
Is this fine?
Yeah.
This is fine?
Yeah, now it's okay, ma'am. Now it's better.
Okay. Right. Okay, so we were talking about adaptations that happened from painting to literature, from literature to painting. Now we look at some of the paintings that inspired literary works. So in 17th century, Mamin had drawn this famous painting of a girl with a pearl earring. And in 1999, look how many years it took for an adaptation to happen, but it still happened. And then in 2003, we have a movie adaptation, the same title, Girl with a Pearl Earring, starring Scarlett Johansson and Colin Firth, I think. So it's easy for you to realize how the journey has gone for that masterpiece, that classic, that painting, that classical painting, the classic in painting, how it has been transmuted from one genre to another, and how much of time it took for the journey from one genre to another one. The same way we all know how Mona Lisa, Da Vinci's Mona Lisa inspired Dan Brown to come up with the blockbuster novel Da Vinci Code, and which was again later transferred or transmuted or adapted into a movie, the same name, Da Vinci Code, starring Tom Hanks. So we also have other writers. Lots of them are there, like the Matisse stories by A.S. Biat and the luncheon at the party, the morning party. Yeah, so these books were all inspired by paintings. So it is not just a one-way thing. It's not just literature that inspires paintings or photographs or sculptors or movies. It goes the other way around also. So it is a give and take sort of thing. So when you look at literary adaptations, the biggest problem is that how do we kind of contain this thing for a talk for 40 minutes? So I was wondering where I can probably draw the line and make a selection of classics, because when you're talking about literary adaptations, we have adaptations happening from in paintings, in photographs, in sculptures, in films, and films. If you start films, there is no end to it. It's like a vast universe. Where do we stop, and how do you draw a paradigm for a selection of movies? That was my biggest problem. I mean, if you take Shakespeare alone, that has become a canon of itself. So we have Shakespeare, the Bengali adaptations, the Malayali adaptations, the Hindi adaptation, Shakespeare's own life being adapted into a movie. And this is the remake of Tempest. This is Taming of the Shrew. So it's a continuum. It's an ongoing process. So how do we make a selection? And also, when you're talking about classics, it's not just Shakespeare. We even have Beowulf. So can we remove Beowulf as a classic? Probably not. And we have Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express. And Kenneth Branagh I think, is working on yet another movie adaptation of Christie's work. And we have our own, Sherlock. There was Sherlock Holmes, Hollywood adaptation. And we have BBC adaptation, Sherlock, into cities. So Conan Doyle. So obviously, Christie or Conan Doyle were not considered as classics in their own time, but now they have become classics. So how do I talk about all these classics in a 40-minute span was my problem. Again, let's not, that's a small problem there, the technical glitch. So there are posters hidden behind that picture of a lantern. So let's not be Eurocentric when you're talking about classics. There are also Oriental classics, like, for example, the Arabian Nights, the stories in the Arabian Nights. So 1001 Nights, The Thief of Baghdad, two versions of Thief of Baghdad movies. So I had posters of them there, but it's all hidden behind that lantern. And then Sinbad, so many versions of Sinbad. And Aladdin, the animated version, the movie version of Aladdin. And we had regional versions also in Malayalam movie. I hope you can see this poster, which shows Kamal Hassan, none other than Kamal Hassan and Rajnikant, starring in a Malayalam adaptation of Alauddinum Alpudha Vilakam. It means Alauddin and Magical Lamp. So that made me think that adaptations, how should we really approach adaptations, classic or not? All these become classics in the evolution of time. As time goes on, these works become classics. So I think we should look at them as lanterns rather, coming across us through the river of time. They're floating towards us. Sometimes they bump into each other and they end up at different shows. But they have their own individuality, their own light, and they light up the firmament of our world, of our literary world. So I think that would be a nice way of looking at adaptations. And Of course, I needed some bit of theory, a theoretical support. So I thought, what should I talk about? Should I go for adaptation theory? Obviously, the first choice would be adaptation theory, because Deborah Cartmel says adaptation should be looked upon as the art form of democracy. So I can look at adaptation in literature between genres, like plays being transformed into being translated or adapted into movies, and movies being translated into operas, maybe books being translated into paintings. I prefer to use the term translation because I consider that as translation. And adaptations in literature, it can be intergeneric between genres, adaptation from literature to films or vice versa, adaptations across time and language, which we give a beautiful name and call it as remakes. So there are the Thief of Sinbad, Thief of Baghdad, for example, was made once or twice, and it came across. There's a different time gap, obviously, and so many movies, Shakespearean plays that have been adapted into different languages, into cultural scenarios, different cultural scenarios, and we call them remake. So there is an argument there. Why are we going after so many remakes and adaptations? Does it indicate that creativity is on the ebbing side now? Maybe not, because we can't really say that adaptations don't need creativity. We can't really say that. So if I talk about intertextuality or film studies or culture studies, there obviously comes a point when I have to say the original. When you're talking about adaptation in those terms, we have to talk about an original. Then obviously the other one would be false or fake. So I didn't think that would be fair on the part of us to judge a work of art, adaptation or not. Each work has an independent spirit on its own. It's not for us to say whether it's original or fake. So where do we draw the line there? How do we say that one is original and the other is not original? Can we say an adopted version of a movie, of a book, of a painting is not really original? So especially between genres, when it happens intergenre, you can't really say that. So I thought adaptation theory really may not be the best choice there, because we're talking about transferring a story from one medium to another. And it has been happening, like we know, it has been happening since time immemorial in all the cultures. And I agree with Hutchian, who's an authority on adaptation theory, and she says that each medium, like each genre, has different means of expression, and so can aim at certain things better than others. Like one painting communicates to us certain things, and a book that is based on that painting communicates certain other things. Like, for example, Girl with the Pearl Earring. That painting communicates a lot of things to us, but a book based on that, it elaborates the painting and communicates a different narrative to us. So it can aim at certain things better than the other forms. And the movie again communicates a different text of or different narrative to the viewer or the audience. So like E.M. Gombrich, the art theoretician, said, when a painter looks at the landscape and a writer looks at the landscape, it's the same thought that occurs to them. How do I render it in lines? I thought that was very, very effective and very, very poignant there. That is exactly the thought that a writer and the artist has. How do I render this? How do I translate the beauty of nature into my medium? So I thought multimodality or reception studies would be a nice option to go around this topic, because it's a huge topic. It's a wide topic. It's a large topic. So it's simply not possible to curb it in 40-minute framework. So I thought I'll opt for multimodality. It just means that the use of, it's an ensemble of modes of meaning that is decoded, that is encoded and decoded. So it's part of the reception studies. And we all know that meaning is pretty complex. It is multi-layered, it is complex, it is orchestrated. It can be implicit or it can be explicit. And the perception of the producer is there, perception of the receiver is also there. So I think adaptations can happen when these perceptions merge or correlate at some point or the other. That is when adaptations or faithful adaptations or surviving adaptations can happen. Because if the perception of the producer is not properly understood by the receiver, then obviously he cannot go ahead with an adaptation of that stuff, because the essence, the soul of that work is lost there. So I thought I'll focus my talk on this multimodality or the reception under the reception studies, and I look at meaning or the creation of meaning, how this complex structure of meaning is created around classics. This would involve terms like intersemiotics, that is the communication of meaning or the interrelation or intercommunication, channelizing of meaning between different sign systems. We have intersemiotic texture, we need to take care of that. There'll be semantic multiplication. I don't have to explain the term, it's pretty self-explanatory. What I construct when I see Mona Lisa, for example, the meaning that I construct around that picture will be different from an African who is viewing Mona Lisa and constructing a meaning there. The Ravi Verma pictures, for example, how we construct a meaning around a Ravi Verma picture will be different from how a European constructs his meaning. So there will be semantic multiplication that happens to a text or a discourse. The text can be, the resource can be the semantic resource, the semantic mode can be a painting, a book, a poem, a short story, anything, a form of art. So there will be semantic multiplication that happens, which is there in adaptations when it happens across genres. And there are individual modes that contribute to overall meaning of the discourse or the text. So apart from, the modes are resources of semiotics or meaning. So these modes actually, they contribute on their own and they contribute to the overall meaning of a particular discourse or a text. So we should view each adaptation as a multimodal ensemble. This is not strictly in adaptation theory. I am adapting certain concepts from semiotics to understand adaptations that happen across genres. I hope that's clear enough. These concepts do not come under adaptation theory. Adaptation theory is a separate theory that looks at adaptation, like how do we take care of an adaptation? What are the technicalities involved in adaptations? What are the changes to make? What are the things to be retained, etc., etc., etc. But I'm looking at how these adaptations survive the test of time. How do classics enable themselves to be adapted across genres and across time? How is it that a painting in the 17th century came to be adapted into literature, into a novel in the 20th century, and again was adapted into a movie? What is the value that provokes, that provides the spark for the survival of these classics across time? That is what I'm looking at, and hence these terms are useful for us. So we look at it as a multimodal ensemble, like a bouquet of flower, a flower arrangement. Now, each of us have an ethnographic social semiotic framework with us, and we use this framework to construct a meaning of the form of art that is put across us. So like this flower arrangement, we appreciate the color symmetry, the shape symmetry. So each individual flower contributes to it. The symmetry of the structure contributes to understanding it, appreciating it. So just like this. An art form, when it is adapted into a different genre, we have different frameworks. We have our ethnographic framework. We have our social framework. We have our individual, egoistic or whatever, individual problems or individual preferences. All these things are there. So we work within that framework and construct multiple meanings, multiple layered, complex meanings for that form of art. So when adaptations happen across genres, we work through these layers. So that's what we are trying to see here. The next question was which classic to choose. So I thought I look at the features of classic. So OUP told me that language is a work of art, any work of art which is of recognized and established value. Now CUP, Cambridge told me that it's of a high quality and it becomes a standard against which other things are judged. Then Merriam-Webster gave me so many features of a classic. It should be serving as a standard of excellence, traditional, enduring. When it is used as an adjective, it refers to a literary work of ancient Greece or Rome. Work of enduring excellence, typical or perfect example. That is what we call as classic. So when I looked at masterpieces, for example, this is a hugely useful book for a literary student, but it described that famous novels, plays, and works of philosophy, poetry, and other classics. So there again, I'm back to square one. How do I decide on a classic? So I thought I'd pick up a couple of useful terms. So I picked up a typical or perfect example, enduring excellence and traditional. So becomes a standard, sort of a benchmark against which the other things are being compared. So I took all these aspects and I thought, I look at characters. Why not look at characters instead of classic works as such? We know all the classics, and those who were not considered as classics, like for example, Holmes, Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie. Their works were not considered as classic in their own time, but now they have become classics. So instead of trying to figure out a classic there, I thought I look at characters that should be actually classified as classics. So there are certain figures. If you look carefully, you can find that there are certain figures that float across to us, across time and space. Transcending the temporal and spatial barriers, there are certain figures that come to our mind that reach us through different genres. The first I would say is a knight in shining armor. If he's handsome, all the more better. That's a bonus. So you look at Superman and look at this. When you look at knight in shining armor, you realize that it's the same. This is knight in shining armor. This is knight in shining cape. So both do the same thing. They are chivalrous. They are brave. Especially specifically they save damsels in distress. So the symbol, what they symbolize, is just the same. And then Lucifer came to my mind, especially because there is a Netflix series now which has already aired season 3 of this new modern adaptation of the biblical version of Lucifer. So I thought I look at characters. Why not characters? And how these characters have been adapted across time, across space, and across genres. So that's how I looked across legends, myths, epics, and classics. Like we have characters, Oedipus, Rama, Arjuna, Sinbad, Mulan, who have all sort of transcended their limitations, their ordinariness, and became uber achievers. Like Rama and Arjuna are of course half god, half human, but Sinbad, Mulan, they're all normal human beings who transcended their limitations and who worked for others. So their bravery, their chivalry, all these things stand out. So I thought I'll focus on Faust and Icarus and Lucifer, and how these three figures have come down across us through genres, different generic adaptations. And what is it that makes them survive? So the reception studies aspect, what is it? How is it? Because a classic does not survive because of the perception of the producer, of the author, of the painter, but it survives, it transcends time because somewhere across time, the receiver, the viewer, the reader can relate to it. So it is at the reception end that something happens to the classic, that the classic somehow communicates to the receiver. That is what actually adds to its durability. So I thought we look at Faust, Icarus, and Lucifer, and took Faust first. So Britannica describes it as one of the most durable legends in Western literature. And he's considered to be the quintessential Renaissance man or hero with his thirst for knowledge, who stops at nothing. So it's very easy to brand him as an overachiever. So we are more familiar as practitioners of English literature. We are more familiar with Marlowe's version of the tragical history of life and death of Dr. Faustus. We have Thomas' novel, the movie adaptation, starring none other than Elizabeth Taylor, and Richard Burton. And I think Globe Theatre and Royal Opera House, they're still, conducting performances. There are live performances of Faust even now happening. So how is it that this character, now we're not talking about archetypes. Please don't misunderstand them to be archetypes. Archetypes are different. They are symbols, like the hero, the villain, the traveler, the explorer, so to say. But this is a particular character who has become a classic in his own way. And he has survived, he or she, like I've taken only masculine characters here, do forgive me, but they have survived the test of time, and they keep working with us. So how is it that this is happening? So if you look at the journey of Faust, it is supposed to have started off in 1587 with an anonymous author who wrote the Faust book. That's a collection of stories about the adventures or the explorations of Faust. So this was spreading like wildfire across Europe. It became a huge hit. And that is what inspired Marlowe's tragical history of Dr. Faustus. And then Faust was so popular that we can find magic manuals. It is associated with black magic. So magic manuals in Faustus' name was popular. And there is an unfinished play by Lessing and Wolfgang Goethe. He is described as the outstanding Faust chronicler. So the time span of how much this character has traveled with mankind. And then 18th century, 19th century, and then there is French version, there is Wagner's. He's moved into music now. Faust has moved into music now. It's just a collection of short stories, became drama, then there are magic manuals, and then play, and then opera, verse drama, and then Wagner's symphony. And then again, dramatic cantata. In the Romantic age, he was a superhero because this is what they wanted. This guy who's with his unquenched thirst for knowledge. So Heinrich Heine's version, Paul Valéry's version, and in the 20th century, so almost 400, 500 years, 20th century, we have a novel. So he has crossed the barrier of genre yet again. He has now moved into novel, into the realm of fiction. And in 2000, we have a movie adaptation, Bedazzled, with Brendan Fraser and Elizabeth Hurley as Satan. So they've done a gender restructuring. And we have Satan in feminine form. That is Liz Hurley. And Faustus is, Brendan Fraser plays the modern Faustus, who pledges his soul to the Satan for 10 days of pleasure, something like that. So the way this character, this classic character, please remember, this is not an archetype. This is strictly a character who has evolved into a classic on his own terms. So this classic character has transcended the barriers of time, space, geopolitical, socio-cultural, historical, all these barriers, and has managed to create a niche for himself. So I was asking myself, why? Why, Varun, Kware, Perche? Why was this happening? Why this fascination with this particular figure? Wasn't he supposed to be power hungry and a luxury seeker and somebody who ran after physical beauty? Why would he want to look at Helen of Troy and say, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? Why? So why is this guy so much of a fascination for the human beings? Now, the answer, I think, I would say, is on the Faustian spirit, which has become equated with insatiable scientific inquiry. So Faust is after absolute knowledge, and knowledge is always power. So this ordinary man transcending his limitations to achieve what he wanted, the self-consciousness, the crisis of identity, the tug between emotion and intellect, the epistemological quest resulting in damnation, a normal man or ordinary man in any era, in any place, can easily identify with all these. So that is what made Faust click across genres and across time. So he has now been immortalized in stories, plays, paintings, opera, symphony, novel. I don't think it can get more varied than this. So that is Faustus' journey. Now, if you look at Icarus, well, it starts off with the Greek myth, and there is this father-son duo trying to escape. So we know the story. The problem is Icarus cannot resist the urge to fly higher, which results in his death. So God punished him. Usually branded as an ambitious, over-ambitious man. So again, a negative quality. But then he's not as popular as Faust, yes, but he is enduring and he is durable. The character of Icarus. So the spirit to transcend the limitation, that is something he has in common with Faustus or Faust. So when you look at his journey across time, there are numerous paintings, literature, and music. The most famous of them all is The Landscape with the Fall of Icarus by the Flemish Renaissance painter, Peter Bruegel, the Elder. And of course, this poem that acted as a sort of an epicenter. So when you talk about classics in adaptations across genres, what happens is that one classic, maybe it is in painting, maybe it is in literature, that acts as a sort of an epicenter. It triggers off a sort of a reaction in other genres. And then that triggers off yet another reaction, sometimes. So this painting by Peter Bruegel, this acted as an epicenter for the literary adaptations of Icarus. And the most famous one of that, the adaptation of the adaptation, is Musée Vibu by W.H. Auden. But then that poem is about how the world turns its head. It actually disturbed Auden. The painting was actually sort of disturbing for Auden. But William Carlos Williams, found this painting beautiful. So he actually translated that painting into words. I cannot call it anything but that because it is a beautiful description of that painting. When you read the poem, you feel like you have watched the painting. That is how beautifully he has done that. But Audens is different. Audens is actually a reaction. The poem is a reaction that was triggered off by that painting. And then we have the portrait of the artist as a young man. The problem with Icarus is that his father was more famous than him, Daedalus. So the maze that he designed, there are sculptors and the legends. Everything was being given to Daedalus, the father, not the son. So Icarus was slightly unfortunate in that sense. But yeah, he has been endured. He has been durable across time. And then you have a poem, Mrs. Icarus, by Carol Ann Duffy. And there is another poem by Anne Sexton, a friend who has come here to triumph. And the last three poems, they are just actually allusions to Icarus. They just make references to Icarus. So Icarus by now has become synonymous with flying and falling, or falling and flying. Somebody who tries to be ambitious, somebody who tries to overreach and fail. So his name is now actually associated with falling, rather. Unlike Faust, though Faust was doomed, it is his attempt to survive, that is, attempt to surmount, that has survived, the spirit that has survived. But Icarus is now more associated with failing, with falling. So this is the poem, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. And this is the painting that launched 1,000 adaptations across the literary world. So, I mean, not 1,000 adaptations, but still, it triggered off. It acted as a sort of epicenter. So this is the painting. There are criticisms about this painting that it shows Icarus, only the legs of Icarus disappearing into the water. And everybody is minding their own business. So that is what Auden's poem was all about. You know, somebody is falling into his tragedy, into his doom, and the world just turns off its head. They don't mind, they don't bother, they don't care, they don't give anything. But Carlos's poem, if you go through the poem quickly, you can see that it's a verbal description. That's why I said it's a literary translation. More than an adaptation, it is actually a verbal translation. He has what Bruegel captured, rendered in lines, in colors. Carlos renders in lines again, but in words. So that is one way of adapting classics into a different genre. Actually, Auden's adaptation and Carlos Williams's adaptation, two different ways of adapting the same classic. The painting is a classic. So how this classic has been adapted into different genres. And now we come to Lucifer. So he's the fallen angel, fallen, but an angel still. Satan, the devil, the son who defied the father, and very often considered as ambitious, overachiever, doomed, punished. But there are people who consider him to be the individualist or the first socialist. Didn't he raise his voice against father's autocracy and led a rebellion against his own father? So isn't he the first socialist then? But rebellious, daring, defiant. Oh, are we talking about Percy Shelley here? No, we're talking about Lucifer. So I think the answer is pretty clear, you know, when you're talking about why Lucifer still remains popular. Because he's rebellious, daring, defiant. He's the dawn bringer. He's the harbinger of morning. He's associated with evil, bad demon. Yet, but still, he persists. He survives in different modes. We have John Milton's Paradise Lost, which was meant to justify the ways and means of gods to men, but ended up glorifying Satan, the fallen angel, the fallen hero. And like I said, the Netflix series, season 3, Lucifer, which is a beautiful modern adaptation of the biblical Lucifer. So what is this reason? What is this multimodality that we are talking about? How is it that the world is still finding meaning in this person who is considered to be bad and evil and associated with a demon? He is the demon, not associated with, he is a demon. So why is it that the world goes on? When we have a church of Satan, and there is a satanic Bible, there are quotes from Bible, and there is even a study guide to study the satanic Bible. So what is it that makes this person, this character of Lucifer? I'm looking at him not as a type, as a character, as a classic character who has transcended, who has broken down all sorts of borders, all sorts of barriers, and survived along, thrived along with mankind. in all their advances, in all their progresses. So if you look at the avatars of Lucifer, that speaks for itself. You have the angel, the fallen angel, who has become the demon. You have the half angel, half demon. You have an anime. Yes, Lucifer has been adapted into an anime. There are video games. And this is a Japanese series called Comic Lucifer. So why is it that this Lucifer refuses to go off? If man is being taught to be good, we should be going after God and the good angels, angels like Michael, who have been good, and archangels. So why is it that we go after Lucifer instead, the fallen angel, the Satan, the demon? So yeah, the journey of Lucifer, if you try to catalog it, I would say it is impossible to catalog. You just cannot catalog his journey because he has been there since the beginning. Because we're talking about the good that became the bad. We all do that, right? We all come across that. So he has been immortalized in paintings, in drama, in folklore, in movies, in books, novels, opera series, video games, religious groups, you name it, he is there. If you type Satan, the number of automated suggestions that come are mind-blowing. Like you never even think that these sorts of possibilities are there. That is how much Satan or Lucifer is into our lives. Lucifer Morningstar, he was the good guy. How did he become the bad guy? So I think that is where the man, the human being can identify himself or herself. He is not just the good angel. He is not just the bad angel, but he is the good angel that became the bad angel, the fallen guy. And he did not fall for himself. It was not for a selfish cause that he raised his rebellion. He was his father's favorite son. So this favorite son becoming the black sheep of the family, it's a situation that any man can identify, or a woman, I mean a person can identify with, right? He tried to transcend his limitations. He took a fall for it, but he was very responsible. He became good at being bad. Once he was branded as bad, he became good at being bad. That is again another situation, a classic situation, wherein a lot of human beings can identify themselves with. So this is how, well, that is what we are talking about, this multimodality of meaning construction. So there is a process of meaning creation as societal processes unfold. So human society is more or less similar in this branding of people. So where many a times a good guy can slip to being a bad guy. So when that happens, it need not necessarily be his fault. Sometimes he's a victim, he's victimized, but then nobody cares. So a lot of victims or people who are on that side can sympathize with this guy, right? So probably that is what is adding to his durability, so to say. Anyway, this is actually a broad topic that needs very careful considerations and deliberations. And it's an enigma. Why is it that Satan or Lucifer continues to lure mankind, humanity? Why is it that he has more followers than the goodness or the good angels have? So that was my attempt to do this, so to deliberate on the topic. So I would conclude, I'd like to conclude that it's not only works of art that are classics. When you're talking about classics, we tend to think that it's a work of art, a painting, a photograph, a book. But characters can also be classic in nature, in the sense that they can be typical, they can be enduring, and they can act as reference points. So what is the durability? What contributes to the durability of these classics across time, across space, across cultures, across genres? I would say it is the reception and creation of meaning that makes a classic stand the test of time. So one classic acting as an epicenter for inspiration, for remakes, for adaptations. If it has to act as an epicenter, there must be potential for multiple meaning making in it. People should be able to find a meaning in that despite the time gap or the space gap or the cultural differences or whatever differences are there. Whatever lacuna is there, the receiver should be able to transmount those differences, those lacunas, those gaps, and find a meaning in that ensemble of meanings. A work of art is a multimodal ensemble. It's not just one mode of meaning. It's a complex semantic sculpture there, a complex construction there. And we have to be able to understand the meaning. We have to be able to understand. We have to be able to communicate with that across all these barriers. So it's a reception and creation of meaning that makes a classic stand the test of time. And plurality of meaning, that is definitely there. No work of art is safe from that, is an exception to that. Any work of art, literature, novel, painting, sculpture, anything, will have a plurality of meaning. Nobody can escape it. Once it's out of the hands of the author or the painter, it is bound to have plurality of meaning, multiple semiotics. So that is what, that potential should be there in the classics, or a character that can be considered as a classic in order to retain its durability. And thus, adaptations happen across genres and time. Now, this, for example, might be considered as a classic 100 years from now, who knows? This might be considered as a classic in morphing, for example. So those are a few of my thoughts. I think I stuck to my time frame. So thank you, and we can have the questions, I guess.
Thank you, madam.
Ma'am,
When
so, excuse me, just a minute. Ma'am, can you close the slide so that we can... Yes, sir, go on, sir.
Thank you, madam. When I was listening, okay, I remember Joy Cogwas, East of the Rockies. I mean, it has been to a wonderful video game. So it's a wonderful talk, madam. Thank you for a brilliant presentation. We have received several questions on the chat box, and I'm sure how many of these we will be able to take up for discussion. I shall read out the question for you to respond to. Here is the first question, madam. Please. The first question from Dr. Vinod K. Chopra. Who will be credited for greatness of classics? Is it the original creator or one who has adapted the classics, or both?
Yeah, same problem. Like that is what happens when we look at it from the adaptation point of view. Like who gets the credit? Which is the original? We'll have to talk about the original and the non-original. So I think scholars now talk about, the researchers are all talking about how each form of art has its own value, its own soul, how each work of art communicates on its soul. Okay, maybe I'm an adaptation. My origin is different, is a different point. Let's take Icarus's painting, for example. The poem by Auden, for instance, that communicates with the reader in a different way. True, it was inspired. The source of inspiration is different, is credited with another person. But you have to consider this adaptation, this genre on its own, as having its own individuality, having its own features, having its own merits, and let that communicate to you. I hope it's clear.
Okay, madam. The second question, it's by Dr. Seema Singh. Here it is. Did each adaptation conceptualize Faust in its own way, and was a fresh take or take on the original?
That is why I took Faust and Icarus and Lucifer. They retain their originality in all their adaptations. There are certain basic nuances in their character, like Faust's inquisitiveness, his search for his quest for knowledge, and stopping at nothing. So that feature, that what we call as Faustian spirit, or Icarus's, falling and failing, flying and falling, and Lucifer again. So there are certain basic aspects of these characters which are never lost in any of the adaptations. So that is why I said we can consider them as classics. But in many adaptations, what we find is that these characters, there are certain nuances of these characters that are lost in translation, in adaptations. But these characters, whatever form they take, painting or genre, whatever genre they take, whatever form they take, they don't lose the essence of that character. That is why I said these characters can be considered as classics.
Madam, Seema madam, continued, okay. Shouldn't each adaptation be viewed independently, possessing its own aesthetics and beauty, approaching the same character through a different length and in a different age?
Yes, exactly. That was my whole argument.
Okay, now it's question from Professor Mohan Raj sir. Please, ma'am. When a work is translated into a different genre, do the two pieces merit comparison? Would it be fair to do so? He has quoted an example. An episode from Mahabharata is presented in the form of a classical dance or a novel written as a play, etc. Please.
Yeah, that would be more under the purview of adaptation theory, I think, wherein you look at adaptations. Like any adaptation, for that matter, is a unique thing. It has its own life spirit and all that. But to compare it, it would be like judging it. So I personally, I don't think that should happen. But we can't help it either. Like the other day, my daughter was watching a movie Badla. I think it's Badla, a Hindi movie which was based on a European movie, An Invisible Guest. So it's like characters have changed. The actors, the cast has changed. It's an Indian movie which is happening in England. So when I was watching Badla, I felt like I was watching a photocopy because the frames, the camera angle, even the dialogues were exactly the same. So that is an adaptation that happened, but I was judging it. I was comparing it and I was judging it. I don't think that is fair to the adapted work because that has its own life, like we have been saying. So a dance piece based on Mahabharata is still an art form. Its source of inspiration is the Mahabharata. It depicts the story from the Mahabharata, yes, but the medium of performance is different. It's not words, it's performance. It's actions, it's gestures, it's fluid movement, it's grace. A whole lot of other parameters are there for evaluating, or I shouldn't be saying evaluating, for appreciating that art form. But of course, the essence lies within the Mahabharata. So personally, I would say adaptations are art forms on their own.
Okay, madam. I would go with one more question by Thalita. Was it that he realized that Faustus, had run after illusory knowledge at the cost of his soul, which turned out to be only too real?
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
The question is, okay, Faustus had run after illusory knowledge at the cost of his soul, which turned out to be only too real.
That is a problem with certain people. Sorry. Like that is what appeals to us also. That nature of Faustus to not give up.
Okay, madam. Would you like to have one more question?
Sure.
Dr. Vaibhav, Sabnis, can we term an adaptation after the life of a work? Please explain.
Can we turn adaptation
after life of a work? It is the question is like that. I'm not sure about it.
Ma'am, the question is there in the WhatsApp chat. You can read it if you want.
Okay. Right. So, is he asking that once the life of a classic is over and an adaptation comes out after that life is over, will that adaptation be good? Is that the question?
The question is, can we term an adaptation after life of a work? Please explain.
After life of a work.
Maybe he says after the work, maybe after a long time after the work has been published.
Okay, yeah. That is why we call it as a classic. Because like I said, it stands the test of time, durability. That is when the work becomes a classic, when it doesn't die at all. Like the painting, The Girl with a Pearl Earring, that happened in the 17th century, 1667, I believe. The adaptation, the novel that came was in 1999, and the movie came in 2003. So the time gap is pretty big there. So a classic is there as a classic because it doesn't have a lifespan. It's not a limited lifespan that it has. It's a never-ending life for the classic. remains as an epicenter, as a source of inspiration for as many adaptations as possible.
Okay, thank you for responding. To most of the questions, madam. Madam has been in her talk brought several illustrations. These spoke so loudly, and the message was very clear. Who's better? Mona Lisa or Ravi Verma and all. Can we really answer these questions? And the range of topics she covered was phenomenal, from classic literature to the moderns, including the literature of advertisement and a variety of semantic interpretation. Dr. Deepa, madam, we could not have asked for anything better, I feel. On behalf of all the participants, I express my appreciation and thank you warmly for the beautiful presentation. Now it's time for vote of thanks. Again, I'm Sridhar. On behalf of ELTAI family members, and our most valuable invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's now my pleasant duty to propose a vote of thanks. These seminars have been possible because of the untiring efforts of the ELTAI webinar organizing committee and all the office bearers. We are thankful to them. The members have been extremely helpful. I don't know whether it is relevant or not. Okay, there is a wonderful song in Telugu. A challani samudra garbham dachina badavanalamento. Okay, kanipinchani bhaskarulendru. It speaks about that there are a number of people works beyond the screen. So we must thank them. And coming to the speaker, a big thank you, Madam Dr. Deepaprasad for her efforts towards adaptation of literary classics across genres. I may like to express our sincere thanks for giving an excellent coverage to the topic, and all the attendees without who this session cannot be happen. And we have completed 5th webinar to date, and next week we have a special webinar with our international participant. Now I hand over Sam to give a brief information about coming webinar. Over to Sam. Thank you, everyone. Okay,
Thank you so much.
I enjoying this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, over to Sam. Please, Sam.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you for this wonderful moderation as well. Sometimes the moderator will not be thanked, but the moderator himself. So I thank on behalf of ELTAI for moderating the session. So the next, for the audience, the next week's webinar is titled English Language Teaching, an Asian Perspective. So we have speakers from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, moderated by Dr. Reddy Shekhar Reddy and Dr. Kalyani. So I again welcome you all for this seminar as well. Thank you, and also be safe. The situation outside is not that great, so please be safe, and thank you.
Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.